Yeah, we'll just have that just for the establishing, then we'll go into a fairly tight shot.
We want to make you look real good.
Make you look robust. Okay. Let's start the tape, and we have the time code on whatever it is.
Yeah, this is tape
7.
7.
So it's time code 8.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to start just with a minute worth of color bars, and that's all. Okay.
We're going to hear them out there. Should I tell them?
Yeah, why don't you tell them to, did you start it yet?
Yes.
You started it? Okay. These are 20-minute tapes, so I'm not sure if we can do what we have to do in 20 minutes,
Here's one
but...
from the days when I earned my living honestly.
Oh yeah, was it railroad, or?
I bought it in 1926.
Really? I hope I can keep some of this old stuff. Okay. Are they going to be quiet back there? He's got a good loud voice, so it may not be too bad. Okay, this is Clyde Arbuckle on October 4th, 1991, in about a minute.
About 30 seconds.
Well, I want to get 15 seconds of...
Should we look at that?
Yeah.
It's a new smell.
Oh, new lamps. Yeah, these are new lights. Okay.
Okay, you're ready, I think.
Go ahead and take off the bars and we'll get that establishing shot.
Try to focus. All right.
Sure. I can tilt down just a bit. Yeah, that's good. Okay, I'll just have you just look at me just for, we won't say anything, but just 10 seconds. Why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Clyde Arbuckle. Born in Santa Clara in 1903 and been a citizen of San Jose since 1939.
You were the San Jose
And I
historian.
worked in San Jose long before I moved over here.
Before we talk about Charles Herrold, talk about the early days when Herrold was experimenting, and when you were very young, in the middle teens up to World War I, around that time. What was it like in this area? Talk about it a little bit.
In San Jose is a description of the streets.
Just what it was like. How were the people? What it was
San
like?
Jose was a small town. It was in the 30,000s when I first started over here. And it was pretty much a two-street town, not necessarily a main street town. First Street was the main North and South Street. Santa Clara, the main East and West. Both streets traversed almost their entire length by streetcar rails. When I came over here to work for my company, the American Railway Express Company, I had a summer job in in 21, and then I turned on steadily in the fall of 22. It was a bustling town, and it was not, it's not what you call a dowdy town, cheap town. It had a fine business district, and many fashionable stores, women's ready-to-wear, men's custom-made clothes. It had large mercantile establishments, the Farmers Union, the various grocery wholesalers, Renzel, and the National Biscuit Company. Almost everything you could think of was here. It was advertised largely, however, as a church and school town. It had an abundance of both. And as a school town, it was the birthplace of public education in California. If you mean a public community with a school, supported by public funds, the first public school was opened here in July 1795 by the order of the governor, and the teacher was Manuel de Vargas. And he was the head of an office. The school came out was established in the Pueblo Granary.
Hmm.
So the crude affair that continued off and on existence down to Mexico took over in 1822, and then a similar existence till the Americans took over, and then public education as we know it today was established here.
Okay, let me ask you, we had talked on the phone about, oh, I'm sorry, we had talked on the phone about, you were talking about building an early radio antenna back in 1914, and you built and experimented, you knew about some of the experimentation that was going on
Yes.
back around that time with crystal sets and...
By 1914-15, I was still in grammar school, and the kids were becoming aware of wireless. And in Santa Clara, there was a high wireless tower, Professor Bell. In fact, Professor Bell, some of his devotees thought more of Professor Bell than they did of Marconi. And they said that he was before Marconi in some of his experiments. So there was a high tower just southwest of the administration building on the campus, the old administration building on the campus at University of Santa Clara. And on the top of it was a great weather vane. There's another tower supporting the antenna, a little ways from that, and it had probably an anemometer on top of it or some other kind of meteorological or weather instrument. And then the antenna was a crossbar at each end, but I believe it had 4 wires on it. And we kids got the idea that was a wireless, despite the fact that the wires were up there. So every kid in the town began to make a wireless. He'd nail it to the roof of his woodshed, or not many of them had garages in those days. But I myself went down to the Perham Company car rail tracks where the lumber was hauled in from up north in the state. There I got long stretches of a heavy wire, about 1/8 of an inch thick. The gauge that would be, I wouldn't know. But anyhow, I got long strands of that and dragged them home, and then got a couple of 4-foot laths and nailed the wires equidistantly on each end of the lath, and hoisted it up. One place were hooked around a rafter, went in between the shakes and hooked around a rafter on our barn, and another one out to a little outhouse in the backyard. That didn't affect the reception. We didn't have any such thing.
That was wireless. Well, you also, being downtown as a young boy, when Herrold was experimenting at the Garden City Bank building, you talked about remembering those antennas on the bank building and what a stir that created.
Yes. There were several. There was a big electric sign up there, set up with electric bulbs. Oh, what wattage, I haven't any idea. And then there was the antenna, the wireless antenna. I recognized that for what it was. But Professor Herrold told us that that was a broadcasting station, and he told us in this very room. And he said that they had a transmitter or an outlet at each corner of the building, east, west, north, south, or the fraction thereof. But they had it there because we made sure it was a broadcast in that sense too.
Now, did he say broadcast? Did he use the word broadcast? Herrold did.
Well, he was broadcasting in 1909, and then that was the year that I started to grammar school.
Okay, do you want to talk about that?
broadcast.
Yeah, why don't you tell a little bit about that story?
And he was advertising his programs in the San Jose Mercury, and music as a phonograph, an old 78.
You want to tell that story about, say a little bit more about what he was doing back then?
He told us here that he experimented with this and experimented with that almost ad infinitum, until he'd get one thing to work. And then Newby was coming in, and Angwick perhaps, and those others, and he had help. There were lots of joint experimenting. This will work and that won't, one would say, and the other, until they got the thing to work. And he said that he didn't have the tube that came later on, the vacuum tube. He had what he called a spark transmitter. And he presented one, in after years, he presented one of those spark transmitters to the museum. And I should say that it weighed about 50 pounds. Big coil, it looked like a coil. So that was what he used, but he was absolutely broadcasting, and he took time. He praised DeForest for all of his work, but he took time to show you that DeForest hadn't perfected transmission yet. And you have a documentary evidence of that today.
Let me ask you something, because I'm going to ask you about Charles Herrold, because I know you talked to him, but a question I have is, what was different about Charles Herrold that made him try broadcasting for an audience instead of just like everybody else, the wireless? I mean, what made Herrold, why was he different?
Now, to explain that, I didn't become acquainted with him except in a business way for my company until years later. I got acquainted with him by delivering express to him and picking up express shipments in the building. And I recognized him as a very courteous man. He addressed me as a human being. Other people, some had other opinions. But anyway, he would gladly sign the receipt, express receipt for us, and pay whatever charge, and would never once tell us it cost less last year. Or some people did, some of our customers. But that's the way I got acquainted with him. And I was still with my company when I got acquainted with Mrs. Herrold. And she was a gracious lady.
In civil
I
church.
remember both of them. He was a master of English. At first, not distilled English, but he was perfect English, his grammar, his rhetoric, and I'd say he was a master of rhetoric.
Mm-hmm. Well, you talked about his personal characteristics, about as a person or as an inventor. You talked about his body, and you said you had a lot to say about Herrold.
Well, when Professor Herrold spoke to anybody, individually or collectively, he put everything into it. This profession or his invention meant the world to him. So he would demonstrate with his hands. One time I almost felt it, as I wished to say to him, if you had palsy, you'd stutter. But he would show you with his hands, show you how he did things. And then in the latter years, as Robert Ingersoll used to say, when the life posts, the shadows of his life mileposts were inclined far toward the east, he still had a sense of humor. He was telling us one day about his last ailment, Meniere's syndrome, which affected the earth. And he was dizzy much of the time. He said, and he told us in the witness, before the witnesses, Charlie Payne, our county recorder, Percy Thompson, a local real estate dealer, all members of the Landmarks Commission, Dr. Early Rhodes, who was a member of the Landmarks Commission, here to hear him, and I think Harry Engwick was with him here. All right, he would say, name a morning, and I believe it was only the morning before, he got out of bed, and he sat out of bed, and finally he sat on the edge, and then finally got down on the floor, on his knees, and he said, "Ooh, the whole world was going around," and he said that's the way it affected him, and any MD today would tell you that's the way it would affect you.
And that was Charles Herrold.
Yeah. But he had to put his body into it, as we say nowadays, body English.
Yeah. Well, what about Herrold? If you had to think about who Herrold was, would you think he was the teacher more than anything else? Would you see him more as a teacher? Is that how you would see him?
Would I think he was what?
Would he be more of a teacher? Was that more what he did back then? Working with young boys?
He was a good teacher. Look at the students he produced. I knew several of them, as I mentioned, Bill Clayton, Wright, and Art Crement, and his brother, and various others around town took lessons. I believe Santa Clara youth may have taken certain lessons. A man named Oscar Roof, he was pretty well up on wireless and radio. We hadn't got around to using radio as a household word yet. So, but I think Herrold was a good teacher. He knew his subject, and he knew how to put it over.
You said you met Herrold's wife. When did you meet her?
I beg your pardon?
When did you meet Herrold's wife?
Oh, I met her years later. I met her, well, I knew her after his death.
What did she tell you about him? Did she?
I didn't question her. We just said, well, I knew your husband, and that was very nice. And I dealt with her for a while. Well, I did deal with her a little earlier for my company, but it didn't occur to me at the time. And I didn't know so much about it.
What was she like?
Well, she seemed to be I believe she was a little taller than my wife. And as I remember, she had a good complexion, dark hair, and she may have just been a little on the plump side.
Now, do you remember Herrold as a musician? Because you're a musician. I mean, do you remember that he would? Did you ever hear him play, or do you remember him as a?
I beg your pardon?
Do you remember Herrold as a musician?
No, I don't.
Okay. Is there anything else you can tell us? We've got about 5 or 6 minutes, but is there anything else you can tell us about what effect Herrold's broadcasting of music and records must have had on the people of San Jose? Because we claim that we're first. I mean, what kind of effect did this have?
Well, all of those who tuned in on him knew that he just seemed to sense that he was first in something. And they didn't know so much about it technically, but they were certainly waiting to hear from him. On what were the crystal sets? Almost every youngster had a crystal set, and then I heard the words cat's whiskers and all that sort of thing. That was pretty much Greek to me. That I do know that he was in there, and I do know that I have checked all the newspapers, and Professor Gregg did too. And they got his story. And then what I liked about him, after he was going, he told how he had some of his experience with the Navy, and then he told about a broadcast in New Jersey. I think it was in Atlantic City, where a narrowcast, as he called it, was made down to a battleship in the bay, and he recognized all the accomplishments of his contemporaries. And in his treatment of DeForest, he didn't deny anything. He gave DeForest credit for all that he accomplished, but then he went on and point by point showed where DeForest was not the real father of Royce Canada. The father was considerably earlier.
Who was?
Which was Herrold, Professor Herrold. People around town, some people referred to him as Dr. Herrold. Well, he knew enough to have 3 or 4 doctorates. But I admired the man all the way around.
He wasn't a doctor. He didn't have a doctorate.
He was a fine, mighty fine gentleman. I'd say in my simple dealings with him, and you already know what they were. And then he went over to KQW, or established FN, KQW, and KCBS. But anyway, he went over to the church, and there they had some much better equipment, the high towers, and the church had a lot of fun with those. They had to get around them because they'd be taxed as a business. So, as I stated in the history of San Jose, the 2 each parishioners each bought a corner of the church building, southwest and northeast, and they owned that there. The church didn't own the land on which they regular thing. And then the KQW had its office in another building adjacent to the church on the north side of San Antonio Street. And I have pictures in my files of Fred Hart in there, one of the managers of the station.
Yeah, would you pick up your book and tell us what that is? Why don't you pick that up, and we'll have you show it to us and tell us what it is. And
well, you were used to know it that way.
Yeah, that's okay. You just say what it. Just tell us.
Or You wish me to open it to me?
Sure, just open it to the Herrold place and tell us what it is. Tell us what the book is.
I think what's in communication.
Tell us that that's your book.
Well, here, we'll just show it. Education.
This is your book. You wrote this book.
No, well, anyway, just anywhere we will. I didn't have a bookmark.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah.
I thought I saw it in there.
It's okay.
Well,
Why don't you just hold up that one part there so we can see it to show that you're the author.
oh, for the love
Yeah,
of
why don't you explain
That's the one you
that it's
wanted
your
me
book?
to-
Yeah, I want you to explain that you wrote this book about San Jose.
no,
Go ahead and say you did. Okay, why don't you just explain, tell me, the TV audience that you wrote, tell us you wrote this book.
well, I had a lot of fun writing this book. I wrote it for the city financed it, and Leonard McKay published it. And the fun was over a period of years, about how it took about 12 or 13 years. Well, I didn't feel badly about that because Walter Prescott Webb took 13 years to write his Great Plains. But I was teaching school at the time. I was handling long-distance field trips. I was writing for the papers, both the News and the Mercury. And I was kept busy. Whatever else I had to do, I had plenty to do around the home. So that was it.
Okay, I think we're just,
And in the time I just played banjo. I belonged to the local here.
yeah, we want you to play, but you said you were.
That's
You haven't played in a
now
while?
what else? You're on banjo?
No, we're just
No,
about
you're
out of tape.
through.
I wanted you to get the banjo out and play a song, but
I'll show you the banjo and I'll show you the proof that I belong to the local.
Sure.
No, I had that, arthritic syndrome.
Yeah, arthritis or, yeah. either one. Before you walk too far,
While
let me.
you're
let
cleaning
me,
up, I'll just get the thing.
Okay,
for
wait,
you.
if you wanna, go ahead, disconnect it.
I have, oh, wait a minute, I'm tied
You
down.
are wired, so let me unplug this.
I've been tied down a few times.
A few times, yeah.
Lucky it wasn't by the men in the white coats.
Yeah. Now let me undo
By some
this.
pretty women, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, you look like you've had a happy life, Clyde. I mean,
Oh, I've had a lot of fun.
let me,
I've seen a fair portion of the world.
we pretty much, we exhausted this, didn't we?
I believe so.
The Herrold story, yeah, I think we got as much as we, let me get this out of
It
you.
was, he was talking